Greetings, my name is Gleb Вишлінський. I'm the Executive Director for Center for Economic Strategy. So greetings to you today. I welcome you to this event for the review of Ukraine economy for the month of May. And the special subject of today's discussion is to how to efficiently use 60 billion euros from European Union for the defense aid. As always, we have interpretation to English language. You can select it on the lower panel of Zoom. Also, as always, you are welcome to ask your questions in the Q&A session. Will be giving you responses right there or voice. Our event is financed by the UK International Development Program, but definitely some of the positions that we express here, they do not reflect the position of the UK government. So we will start with the review economy for the last months. And from there, we will jump to the specialized subjects. So we'll go with the review of the economy. Our senior economist, Natalia Kolesnichenko. Natalia, the floor is yours. Greetings to you with the day of Vyshyvanka. If you celebrate, so today, all of our office wears Vyshyvanka. So what occurred with us in the last months since we have not seen each other? First of all, the State Statistics Service, they published data on the GDP for the first quarter. This is the operative first more general assessment, and it's a pity, but it turned out to be quite sad. The GDP dropped by 0.5% in comparison to previous quarter of last year. The main reason for that is definitely the energy crisis and some of the bombardings and destruction that we received from Russia. And Russia has basically impacted a lot on our energy sector and not just on the energy sector. So the sad results for the first quarter lead to the fact that National Bank already reviewed their forecast of the growth of the economy in the year 2026 to 1.3%, and the Ministry of Economy also announced that the forecasts for this year most likely are going to be reviewed. But not everything is so bad. In the months of April, when the energy situation improved, both the Ministry of Economy and our colleagues, they expect the growth of GDP by 1%, which is also supported by the improvement of the business and consumer activities. So what has happened in the energy in the months of April, especially in the first half of the month, we did have some power outages, and there was quite a high level of import of electric energy, even though it dropped by 40% in comparison to the March numbering. In the months of May, you can see that import of electric energy is even lower. This is due to the fact the situation is quite stable. The demand dropped, repairs are ongoing, and definitely the production of electric energy from the renewable sources increased, in particular the on-roof photovoltaics and solar power stations, etc. So the repairs are still taking place. The Ministry of Energy, they get grant funds from different partners for these things, and then little after little they procure equipment. So Ukraine expects to get the summer peaks of the demand for the consumption and also for the winter season. In particular, the price caps for electric energy were increased till 15,000 hryvnias per megawatt hour for the current day and for the next day market. And that is also supporting the gas power generation, which also came across the low price cap on energy production from gas with consideration of the high gas prices that we have due to the war in Iran, that they're not very very promising. It's a pity, but we do not observe good results from metallurgical production. We observed the drop of the production in the month of April. In particular, there were quite lengthy power outages in the beginning of the month, which basically impacts much on the industries like metallurgical. Metallurgy also complains about the fact that ecological regulation from the EU, the CBAM, drops the requirement of Ukrainian products from the side of EU, and they do not have enough orders, and their product sometimes is declined. At this point, the questions related to the CBAM and additional regulations that are introduced by the EU, they would apply from the second part of the year for the current year, the so-called excessive capacities, which would basically bring to the increase of tariffs for the products of the metallurgy that is supplied to EU from the outside of the EU. The question is not yet decided. However, we can insist that we deserved an exception regime because we are in the negative conditions of the full-fledged invasion, which definitely stops our economical activities, and also from the support, the EU, as far as support from the EU, it makes sense to give us the exemption regime basically forever. So the negotiations are still taking place, and the situation is not fully set yet. And the agricultural campaign for sowing is already slow. This year it's slightly slow just because, we had very cold spring. At the same time, the level of precipitation in the winter was very good, and lots of precipitation in springs, that the experts say that for the harvest we are well provided with humidity, and most likely that should lead us to better harvesting. That's why the Ministry of Economy and USDA, they say that the harvesting for this year is going to be just as good as previous year, but we still have some risk due to the fact that the spring was very cold. There were lots of precipitation. There is lots of many risks that are caused by the fact that there's different the different pests and diseases to take place, and also there is also high risks regarding fertilizer supply and timely contribution of the fertilizers in the necessary volumes. In particular, there are separate manufacturers of the agricultural. They assess the deficit of fertilizers at the level of 20%, which is also can impact on the harvest. But for now, the perspectives of the harvesting season are quite positive. Thank you. This is it from my end. Thank you, Natalia. Let me give the floor to Alexandra Hovrak. She is our economist, and she would share about the situation in the monetary sector. Sasha, floor is yours. Thank you, Gleb. The war in Iran continues to impact the inflation ratios in Ukraine. The main component of this month were transportation and foods. The inflation increased by 8.7% year over year in April and 1.4% month over month. The war in Iran led us to the increasing of the fuel prices, basically, which heavily impacted the cost of transport. They increased by 4.7% as compared to March. Another substantial component of the inflation is when the food prices, due to the buckwheat prices, went up. But this is a temporary, basically, increase that will normalize with the growth of the new harvest. The NBU also review the forecast of the inflation, and due to the war on the Middle East, they expect the inflation would grow till 9.4% year over year by the end of 2026, and not 7.5% as it was expected in the past. The observation of that forecast, they required that the NBU to maintain the key policy rate at the 15% in April, and also to the quarter number 2 for 2027. Also in April, there were some restrictions that were relaxed to reach main three goals. First of all, the support of the defense industrial complex, since when the restrictions dropped, that would allow banks to run different manufacturing for the military goods, no matter matter the
залишки іноземної валюти
balances
на
of the
рахунках.
foreign currency
По-друге,
on the
послаблення
account.
також
Secondly,
залучати
that would also allow us
висококваліфікованих
to
спеціалістів,
attract
які
highly
є
qualified
резидентами
specialists to the
України
management
до
positions, those
управлінських
who are not
посад
resident of
в
Ukraine,
українських
at the
компаніях за рахунок
opportunity with
можливості
allowing them to
оплати та
procure
пересилати
and move the
іноземну
foreign
валюту
currencies
з
from their
їхніх
accounts.
рахунків. По-третє,
Third
військові
thing,
службовці,
the
які є
residents of other
резидентами
countries who
інших
are
держав, також буде тепер
military
дозволено
people in the
купувати
armed
та
forces of
пересилати
Ukraine, they
іноземну
can
валюту
procure
відповідно
and
до
sell the
їхнього
foreign currency in
забезпечення,
accordance to their
що
compensations, which
може
would allow
залучати більше таких
us to
людей
get
до
more people of such
Збройних
category
сил
to the
України.
armed forces of Ukraine. And we now go to, yes, we'll review the situation in the fiscal sector. So Sasha Mironenko, the economist, would share what do we have with the incomes and expenditures of the budget. Thank you, Glib. So traditionally, we will talk about the proficiat of the budget. The most important thing is that crisis on the Middle East continue to impact on the budget, which is reflected on the incomes. It has the positive things on incomes, so incomes grow. So the middle, the April incomes is higher than last year level almost by quarter. And if you compare to the plan, the budget got more funds than expected. And one of the main reasons for that is definitely the crisis on the Middle East, since due to the higher global prices on oil and very active imports operation, Ukraine received more income from the import VAT and also the excesses on the fuels. Another thing was very good that the personal income tax and military levy basically renewed the gross uh, contributed to the growth of salary. We know that the incomes are growing, nevertheless, the internal resources are insufficient to cover all of the expenditures on the budget, in particular the military expenditures. On this slide, you can see the draw of the military expenditures. In March, they grew by quite a quarter in comparison to the previous year, and also they increased the expectation. And the main reason is the increasing of the expenses of the expenditures on the depend and sustainment. But if we look a little broader, if we look at quarter number one, January to March this year, the situation looks quite different. No matter that there was a drop, there was an increase in May, in March, still the expenditures were lower than what we had previous year, which is definitely caused by the shrinkage of international aid in the natural form. So the needs of the war did not drop. The war is still going on, but the resources for financing the war are dropping. So the war slows down the financing of the war, no matter the high war-related needs. And because of that, in the beginning of the month, in the months of May, the government initiated changes to the state budget by increasing the profits in what relates to the war-related expenditures, and but the incomes also grew, which resulted in the support by the EU with the provision of the new program, which is called Ukraine Support Loan. And so what is new in it? Since the changes to the state budget in the middle of the year are done not for the first time, but for the first time ever, they drop the deficit of the budget, not increase it. Since the assistance for Ukraine, it all comes as a result of increasing of our expenses, but not the increasing of our financing. And my colleague will share more details about that. Yes, Alexandra, thank you very much. And basically, right now we're about to go to our special subject about how to efficiently use the 60 billion euros from the European Union on the defense sector. Basically, recently, the EU board, they have approved the 2-year long billions of 90 billion, of which 30 would go to support the state budget, 30 will go to support the state budget, and 60 will go on the defense. Basically, most of the attention is tied to the 30 billion to support state budget. But even though if you calculate the amounts that we have on the defense, they're twice as large. But we came across with very limited
дуже обмеженим обсягом
information
інформації
about that
про цю
aid,
допомогу, і
and
навіть
it seems
не
to me it's
мені
even
здається,
not
не
to the
через те,
fact, not
що
due to the fact
тут
that
є
there's lots of
багато секретності
basically
пов'язаної з
secretive
власне
materials that
оборонним
related to
використанням
the
коштів, а з тим, що цей механізм є
I
абсолютно
also
новим для
can
всіх
see
учасників цього
what are
процесу,
the
і
expectations of this project, and
власне
something that
щось,
is
що перебуває в
in
такому
the stage of the
стані
construction.
будівництва,
Nobody
ніхто
wants to
особливо
comment,
коментувати не
give any feedbacks
хоче.
here.
На жаль,
It's a
сьогодні
pity,
ми
but also
не
today we
змогли
didn't manage to
профільних
get
міністерств
certain speakers from the
отримати
specialized
спікерів профільних
ministries,
міністерств отримати спікерів,
and because somebody
тому що
is
хтось
too
безпосередньо
busy with
зайнятий
the
дуже
management of
сильно
those
управлінням
resources,
цими
others they
ресурсами,
just
а
say
хтось
that we
каже,
have
що ми все
committed
передали в інше
everything to the other ministry,
міністерство,
please,
не чіпайте нас.
don't touch us, leave us alone.
І тому
And
ми,
basically
власне,
now
зараз
Maxim
Максим
Самолюк, my
Самолюк,
colleague who
мій
is
колега,
responsible
який, власне, відповідає за
for the
проект щомісячних оглядів і
month-to-month reviews and for the
також за
analysis of
аналіз
external
зовнішнього
financing of
фінансування
Ukraine, he
України,
will take a
розбере
look
максимально
in details about
детально
the
для
picture
вас
from the
картинку
European
з
assistance,
європейською допомогою.
and
І
then
далі
we would
ми
also discuss
обговоримо,
the
власне, як
best ways
найкраще її
to use it
використати з
with the representatives
представниками
of the two
двох
stakeholders in this
стейкхолдерів
process.
в цьому процесі,
I mean, those who are
тих, хто
engaged to
залучений до
the supply of
постачання, власне,
Ukrainian weapons
української
to the
зброї
armed forces of
до
Ukraine to
Збройних Сил
protect the
України для
country, and
захисту
on the other
України,
side,
і з іншої сторони
the European
Європейського
Union. And basically,
Союзу.
I will
Детальніше колег
introduce
я
my colleagues a bit later, but for
представлюсь
now,
менше, зараз передаю
I'm going to
слово
give the floor
Максиму.
to Maxim.
Максим.
Maxim.
Дякую, Глібе.
Yeah, thank you,
Насправді
Gleb.
не
You
треба
don't
мати
need to have
якісь
very
серйозні
serious
інсайди
insights into
в
the
уряді чи ще
government
десь
or
для
elsewhere
того,
to
щоб
figure out the
розібратися
mechanism
в
of how would
механізмі,
that
як
financing work.
працюватиме це
It's
фінансування.
enough just to open the
Достатньо просто
website of the European
відкрити
Commission
Європейську
and
комісію
just
і
to read some
прочитати
of the foundational
засадничі
documents
документи, за
that
якими
are going to be
розподілятимуть цей
describing this
кредит
loan
90
of 90
мільярдів
billion
євро.
euros.
Європейська
European
комісія
Commission
доволі
have
чітко
very
прописала
clearly described the
якісь
main
основні
rules and
правила,
principles and approaches,
принципи і
in
підходи,
particular to
в
what
тому
relates to
числі
the defense
оборонного
financing.
фінансування.
And
І
now
зараз
we'll try
ми
to figure
спробуємо
out in
розібратися
details
в них
with them
детальніше,
as we
базуючись
completely
повністю
base
на
our
офіційній
sayings on the
інформації від
official
Європейської
informations
комісії.
from the European Commission. So what do we have as the key
Що ми
thing? The
маємо
key thing
ключового?
is
Ключове
that
це те, що
Ukraine got a
Україна отримала
chance
шанс
to stay and
протриматися
to
ще
stay
2
strong,
роки у
to survive
повномасштабній
2 more
війні.
years,
Це
thanks to this
суми
loan of
кредиту
90
в
billion
90
euros.
мільярдів євро.
It is broken down into
Він
two
ділиться на дві
portions.
частини.
First of all,
Це
direct budget
пряма бюджетна
support of 30
підтримка
billion
до
euros,
30 мільярдів
and
євро
also
і
defense support
оборонна
at the
підтримка
level of 60
60
billion euros,
мільярдів євро,
which we
яку ми
would
сьогодні
review
детальніше
today
і
in
розглянемо.
closer look.
Ці
Those 60
60
billion euros, they
мільярдів
will be
євро
divided in
ділитимуться
between
на
the
2
2
роки.
years. This
В
current
цьому
year, we
році
will get
ми
less than a
отримаємо трохи
half, which
менше
is
половини,
28
це
billion
28
euros,
мільярдів
and
євро.
next year, almost
Наступного
32
майже
billion euros.
32 мільярди євро.
So we can
Тобто
foresee
передбачено,
that
що
throughout this period
впродовж цього року
of
в
time, the
механізм
mechanism would go
вийде
to
на певні
certain
рейки,
rails, so to say.
напрацюється
They would
остаточно
develop the mechanism of
процес,
how
як
to
ці кошти
utilize these funds.
використовувати.
And
І вже
also in the
наступного
next year,
року
Ukraine is going to be
Україна
able
зможе
to use
витратити трохи
slightly
більше
more
грошей
funds
на
on
оборону
defense
з цього
from that
кредиту.
loan. What is important
Що є
out of
важливим
the continuance,
з
out of
умов?
the conditions? First of all, it is known that
Відомо,
the 30
що
billion
30
of the
мільярдів
budget
бюджетної
support,
підтримки
these are
це
the
гроші в
funds
обмін
and
на
as an
реформи.
exchange to reforms. They
Вони
go via two
діють через
mechanisms,
два
Ukraine
механізми: це
facility and
Ukraine
also
Facility,
direct
а також
microfinancial
пряма
assistance.
макрофінансова підтримка.
Both mechanisms,
Що той
they
механізм передбачатиме наявність
require the
індикаторів, які
presence of
Україна
certain
матиме
pillars and
виконувати,
indicators that Ukraine have
певні
to comply
зобов'язання.
with. As
Для
far as
оборонної
defense
підтримки
support, there are
немає
no
жодних
single
умов.
requirements.
Єдине і
One,
вкрай
and
важливим
the
є те,
only
що
important
Україна
thing is that Ukraine
продовжуватиме
must continue to
дотримуватися
meet
основних
most
європейських принципів
the
верховенства
core
права,
European
не робити жодних
principles
відходів
of the
від
rule of law,
демократії,
not to cut
ну і
anything with
продовжувати
democracy
боротися з
and continue
корупцією.
fighting corruption,
Це дуже
which is
чітко
very
прописано
clearly stated by European
Європейською
Commission.
комісією.
The
Важливим
other
є
important
також і
thing is
те,
that the
що використання
utilization
цих
of these
коштів
funds are
дуже
going to be
чітко
very clearly
регульовано.
controlled. Ukraine
Україна
needs
має
to open a
відкрити
designated
окремий
account
рахунок,
from
з
which
якого будуть
they
проводити усі
will
платежі,
run all of the
пов'язані
payments that
з
are related to
зазначеними
those
60 мільярдами
60
євро.
billion euros. Following the
За
information in the
інформацією
media,
у ЗМІ,
which is not really official information. This account is going to be open in the Deutsche Bundesbank. This is the state bank of Germany, and via that bank, all of the payments will go through. It's quite possible that those funds are not going to be coming to Ukraine on paper, and it's important to the European Commission from the standpoint of audit and control over the designation use of the funds. What is important for Ukrainian army is that any equipment, any weapons, any munition that is procured within this loan, they would not have restrictions as far as of how to use them. In the past, quite often we heard that Ukraine would get HIMARS, but they cannot use the HIMARS to hit into Russian territory. In terms of this 60 billion euros loan, European Commission quite clearly said that such a thing cannot be present. So we can be totally free about how can we use the equipment and what exactly do we need to do to use those events as efficiently as possible. Ukraine also needs to get the high-quality military advantage over Russia. This is also very clearly said in the documents about the 60 billion euros of loan for the defense support. We've got three ways of how Ukraine, with assistance of European Union, will try to reach that goal. First thing, that is the scaling of the defense manufacturing on the territory of Ukraine. And Ukrainian companies abroad, they would create new manufacturing capacity, they would expand the existing, so scaling up, that's one thing. Secondly, also expediting the supply to Ukrainian army to make sure that the munitions, the weapons, and that is supplied to Ukrainian army, that it would come as quickly as possible, so that there would be some manufacturing capacities reserved, so that there would be certain accumulation on the warehouses of what is necessary, both of the finished product as well as raw materials, and also expedition of supply. And the third thing, integration Ukrainian defense industry with the European. That is quite interesting thing because it is called, first of all, not to provide the first priority needs of the army, but it's also called to support the cooperation between Ukrainian and European defense company. This should be win-win cooperation, not just for European companies, but also to our companies, so that Ukraine becomes the member of European defense community. The funds from the 60 billion euros can be used to procure all kinds of military equipment. This is very important. Quite often, it is said that 60 billion loans of credit would not be would be able to increase the salaries of the military people. This is not exactly so, because the funds from the 60 billion euros, they can be used only for the defense procurement, but the fiscal space in the Ukrainian budget, which will appear fiscal room due to the fact that we'll get 60 billion euros, it would allow to release from the Ukrainian budget some funds to increase the salary of the military people. And my colleague have just recollected that, and we can see that this process of reviewing the budget have have started just due to the fact that 60 billion euros are already there. So the procurements of 60 billion euros are broken down to two categories. First category is the so-called rather simple or regular small scale means of military equipment, like rockets, interceptors, artillery systems, or a variety of equipment for soldiers. or
або
small-sized
навіть
drones
дрони,
like
типу
FPV drones or reconnaissance
або
drones, which are
розвідувальні
small in size.
дрони.
Another thing that's quite
Також, що
interesting
цікаво, в цю
is
категорію
that
включено
this category
захист
also
критичної
covers the protection
інфраструктури.
of the critical
Тобто
infrastructure. So
потенційно з
potentially,
60 мільярдів євро
out of
можна
the
буде
60 million euros,
фінансувати
we can also finance
захист
the defense
критичної
of critical
інфраструктури на
infrastructure
території
in
України.
the territory of Ukraine. The category
Категорія
of
перша
wine,
є
of category
особливою
one,
тим,
is special
що
because it
вона передбачає
provides
широкий
broad
пул
supplier pool. It
постачальників.
could be
Це можуть
Ukrainian,
бути
European
українські,
companies. It could
європейські
also be
компанії. Це
manufacturers
також
from
можуть бути
other
виробники
European
з
space
інших
countries
країн.
without any restriction.
Практично без обмежень. На відміну від
Unlike
категорії
with
другої.
it relates to the category
Чим вона
two. What's different?
відрізняється?
The procurement
Єдине
within the
обмеження з
category
другої
number two
категорії
is
це
rather
більш
more complicated,
складне,
more sophisticated,
витончене, англійською мовою
more
добре слово
sophisticated
sophisticated,
military equipment.
військове обладнання.
And for instance, the
Наприклад,
air
засоби
defense
ППО
means or
або ПРО,
anti-rocket
протиракетна оборона.
defense.
Наприклад,
For instance,
морські
the
засоби,
maritime
морське обладнання
equipment
або
or
військове
underwater
обладнання.
equipment,
А також
and the
більші
larger size
дрони, в тому
drones, in
числі
particular the
далекобійні
long-range
і
ones and the
системи
counter-drone
оборонних
systems.
таких дронів.
What is the
В чому
peculiarity of
особливість
category number
другої
two?
категорії?
The
Тут
pool
пул
of suppliers
постачальників є більш
is more
обмеженим,
restricted because any
тому що
supplier
будь-який
that
постачальник, який
might want to
претендуватиме на
procure anything
закупівлі
within the
в
category
межах
two of the
категорії 2
European
Європейського
loan of
Союзу
60
60
billions,
мільярдів,
he
має
has to
мати
be
повне
fully
право на
authorized to
використання
use
всіх
all of the
елементів
elements
цієї
of the
продукції.
products. What does
Що
that
це
mean?
означає? Це означає,
That
що
means that
якщо
if, let's
є
say, if
якась,
there's
наприклад,
any air
система
defense system,
протиповітряної оборони,
and
в
if
якій
one of the
один з
critical
критичних
elements, let's
елементів
say, is
вироблений,
manufactured
наприклад, в
in the
Сполучених
United
Штатах.
States, then the
Зараз
situation that's quite
поширеною є
common
така
here is
ситуація,
that the
що
manufacturer of the
виробник цього
critical
критичного елементу може
element
заборонити
cannot allow
використання
the utilization
всієї
of
готової продукції
complete
на території певної
assembly
країни,
to be
наприклад,
used on the
України.
territory of Ukraine.
Європейський
European
Союз дуже
Union
чітко
very clearly
написав,
stated
що
that
за
for the 60
60 мільярдів
billion
євро
euros,
така історія
such a
не
story
пройде,
will not go well
якщо йде
if
закупівля
the
за
European
європейські
funds are
кошти
used to procure the
складного
complicated,
обладнання для
sophisticated
України,
equipment for Ukraine. The
виробник
manufacturer of
такого
Ukraine
обладнання має мати
has
виняткове право на
got
використання всіх
to
елементів
have the
цього
unique
обладнання. І
right
ніхто
to
не
use
зможе
all of the
заборонити
elements.
Україні
So nobody can ban Ukraine from
використовувати цю
using the
зброю
weapons or to
або
supply
взагалі
the weapons
постачати в
to
Україну це
Ukraine.
обладнання.
This is very
Це дуже важливий
important
запобіжник від
safeguard from all kinds
різноманітних
of
неприємних
unpleasant
історій.
stories. And in the end of the day,
І зрештою, Україна
Ukraine
має
have
низку
got several
варіантів, як
options how to use
використати
the funds from
кошти
that
цього
loan.
кредиту
And
в
in some of
засадничих
the
документах
foundational
прописано
documents
5
that
шляхів,
we've got 5
які
different
умовно можна
pathways
поділити від
which
тих,
can be
що мають на меті забезпечити потребу
distinct
тут і
from
зараз на полі
the ones
бою,
that talk about
до тих,
providing
що
protection here
покликані
now on the battlefield,
інтегрувати
all the way to the ones
українську
that are
оборонку до
called
європейської.
towards integration
Тобто
of
такий
Ukrainian defense
спектр
into the European
опцій,
defense. So this is the
які
broad
всі
spectrum of options
різними,
that are useful, but
але
they're useful
корисні
in
трохи
different matters.
по-різному.
The most
Той
simple path
найпростіший
is the
спосіб – це
direct
прямі
Ukrainian procurement for
закупівлі
UA
для
army,
української армії.
which
Тобто
means that
Україна
Ukraine is going to
зможе
be able to,
контрактувати
procure
певне
certain
обладнання, певну зброю, певні
equipment
боєприпаси
or
за
munition
відповідно
with a direct
спеціальним
supply
військам. І
to
далі ми
to the
рухаємося
army. And then we
в
go
бік до
towards
більш
rather
таких довгострокових
long-term
історій. Це,
stories. First of all,
наприклад,
the bilateral
двосторонні
agreements
угоди
with
з різними
a variety
країнами,
of
коли
countries.
Україна
Like, for instance,
домовляється,
if
наприклад, з
Ukraine goes into a
Данією
contract
або
with
з іншою
Denmark or any
країною
other country
Європейського
of European
Союзу або
Union or
членом
European
Європейської
community,
спільноти, про те,
they
що
would say that the
виробники з
manufacturers from
цієї
that
країни
country
будуть
will be
постачати
supplying the
обладнання для
equipment to
України.
Ukraine. Another
Takож
option
серед
is mutual
опцій спільні
procurement via the
закупівлі через
so-called
інструмент
SAFE
SAFE.
instrument. Another
Також
option
серед
covers
опцій
agreements with
домовленості
international
з
or
міжнародними або
intergovernmental
міждержавними
organization.
організаціями.
And
Ну і найбільш
probably
таким
the most
довгостроковим
long-term
варіантом є
option
внесення
is
до
contribution to
європейських
European
програм
programs
розвитку
of
оборонної
defense
промисловості або
industry
інших європейських
or
програм, які
other
покликані на
defense ministries
розбудову
that
ППО.
are having then the
Формально
goal of
Україна,
develop the
тільки Україна
defense
вирішує, що
sector.
купувати.
Only
В
Ukraine
документах
decides
не
what to buy.
прописано,
Those
що
foundational
має бути
documents
чітко
do
визначено,
not claim
наприклад,
that 80%
80%
should
на
be
якісь
spent on the long-term
довгострокові
stories
історії
and
і
only
тільки
20
20%
on a
на
direct
прямі
procurements. No,
закупівлі.
such
Такого
thing is not
немає.
there. So Ukraine
Тобто
will be able
Україна
to
зможе
decide for a
вирішувати
certain moment of
в
time
певний момент
what
часу, яка
need
потреба
is
є
the
найгострішою
most acute and
і
what
що саме
exactly
потрібно
needs to be
фінансувати за
financed with the
допомогою
help of
європейських
the
грошей.
EU funding.
Важливим є
The
те,
important
що
thing is that
в
overall
цілому
speaking, the
кредит в
loan of
90
90
мільярдів
billion
передбачає
covers the opportunity that Ukraine would provide, the high level list of the needs for the year 26-27. The strategy for the year 26 was already presented and approved. And the next thing, in the framework of that strategy, Ukraine is going to be able to decide and provide EU with a separate request for financing. The important thing as well is that European Commission has got the right of the final approval. No matter the fact that Ukraine decides what to buy, European Commission has certain safeguards regarding confirming or non-confirming those procurements. Most often they are directed towards the prevention of certain corruption-related stories, but at the same time we have to be aware and understand that European Commission also have their own interest, which also talk about the development of the European defense industry, and even hypothetically, the option that all of the 60 billion euros will go exclusively to procure within the country of Ukraine, most likely it's going to be, okayed by the European Commission. Therefore, the quite important thing is the cooperation between the EU members and the search for the beneficial cooperation between Ukraine and the member countries. The balance to supply the Ukrainian needs here and now is covered, and also to provide the needs of the Ukrainian army as soon as today. And also, when you look at it from more of the long-term thing in the cooperation with the European Union, that we also develop or build in or integrate Ukrainian defense thing into the European. That would be one of the key challenges on how to use the 60 billion euros, just because we would need to basically stand as much as possible for our own interests. We need to understand what we need, first of all, and we need to understand of how can we basically present it in front of the European community. So we think that such discussions as we are having today and now are very beneficial for all of us, so that we can understand the mechanism that was offered to us, that we agreed upon, and also how we most efficiently use it. This is it from my end. Thank you. Thank you, Maxim, for a very in-depth review. I think here on this slide you can see the main messages that we have following the results of our presentation. And once again, the real GDP fall year to year by 0.5%, but the first sign of the economic revival in the April and May. Also, the impact of the war on the Middle East, on the inflation of Ukraine, and the review of the inflation forecast by the National Bank of Ukraine with the expectation that by the end of the year, the inflation will reach its peak. Another, the expected review of the budget was the consideration of 90 billion euro loan that we had from the European Union. Another thing is the distribution of funds of 90 billions as 60 plus 30 for civilian and military needs. And the goal for the 60 billion is to give the quality advantage to the Ukrainian army. So let's go to the discussion now. And basically, the first person I would like to give the floor to is Lyubov Shipovich. She's the co-founder of the NGO Dignitas, which helps the armed forces with the technology solutions. And basically they're in the front lines of utilization of new technologies. So since you are the closest to the needs of the armed forces, can you try to focus your attention on that and how these finance resources should be used. Because truly speaking, 60 billion euros for 1.5 years is roughly equivalent of almost 25% of GDP for that period. That's a lot of funds. So what is the best way to use them from the standpoint of war, from the standpoint of protection of our territory, and also in leading the enemy towards the completion of the war on the conditions that are convenient to Ukraine. Greetings to everybody. Thank you for inviting me in for the very important discussion. And as far as the priorities, it seems to me that our Ministry of Defense, they've made up a good list of priorities. First and foremost, everything that is necessary to protect the skies, the air defense, interceptors, radars, tactical radius radars, anti-drone system, munitions, and so on and so forth. But what it seems important to me is also the infrastructure for utilization of all these means. What do I mean? The anti-drone protection, that the Shahid protection, like the partner countries, they have financed the substantial number of the interceptors. In particular, if you look at our units, we don't see any deficits of those means. Like everybody who was supposed to receive those means, they did receive those means. On the other side, we also observe that there's growth of crews, that we have some means, but somehow they do not work. When we try to find out why don't they work, as we see that in order to have interception of Shahid, it's not enough to have the crews. You need to have infrastructure. You need to have the low-range radio location system. You need just transportation to get the crews on the position, to generators, charging stations, Starlink, so on and so forth. All of the infrastructure. No procurement agency from none of the European countries knows how to do it, because these are quite not typical goods for the army. Oftentimes they're customized solutions to work for certain crews to intercept Shahids. That's one time to intercept the small strike drones like Molnia and Lancet. That's totally different type. So this is something that we got into that end of the state procurements. The state do not know how to procure these. And here we've got the public sector who came to assist us, and the NGOs and funds that procure them for quite so many years. But basically on the EU level, when we started talking about them, about the fact that the state funds can be used to procure, to be used by the non-for-profit organizations. We already had the precedent with the foundation Poverty Живем, who got financing from the governments of two countries as exclusive financing for the two procurements. In particular, our fund that goes through the due diligence with three countries with such a thing where the NGO can become the procurement muscles for the list of procurements that are difficult for the state agencies to operate through, due to the fact that they do not know how to do some small things like antennas, cables, charging stations, things that quite often change things that are very customized. And it seems to me that it could be also a new model of procurement, which is used both in Ukraine and with Western partners. I know that Lithuania also considers such a model. In particular, if I'm not mistaken, next week they will have the forum of the non-for-profit organization of Lithuania to get experience from Ukrainian organizations to explain them how to do such procurements with the state funding. And I think it's also very important anytime we talk about the large-scale state procurements that we do not forget the infrastructure portion of it, because no airplanes fly without the maintenance. no interceptors work if the radar is blind to the enemy UAV and so on and so forth. Therefore, I think we need to engage that from the infrastructure level. And beyond all that, we also observe the growing need on all of the means of the air defense. We see that in the last year, Russia have increased the using of Shaheeds almost 5 times fold, and sometimes they launch simultaneously 5 times as much as previous year, and the types of Shahed UAVs changes as well. We've also got the combination strikes when Shahed they first exhaust the classic air defense and some interceptors, and then we've got the cruise rockets and ballistic rockets. And as far as anti-ballistic defense, we are still dependent from our American partner systems, Patriots. At this point, nobody successfully repeated their success. And the important thing is that portion of these funds should be targeted towards the development, because Europe cannot be dependent to United States. As we see, United States, modes changed quite often. That's why anti-ballistics direction of the protection of for Europe, it's going to be quite important thing, and which underlines the fact that Europe is quite interested in the development of their capacities. And basically, Ukraine is going to be the polygon where all of the security solutions are going to be developed. Another thing for the German vehicle manufacturer, the chance number 2 could be the military tracks, which is supplies to the armed forces of Ukraine to adapt their developments. And we talk not only about the heavy armored vehicle, but also about the vehicles that are like passenger vehicles that we see that are massively used on the front line. We talk about the pickup trucks that we have, and we see that Ukraine can procure Japanese-made Toyotas, but also at the same time they can start, playing with the companies from German, like for instance the company by the name MAN, who's got special contract on the interstate level for the servicing and the supply of transportation. So here they can play their own role, and they can adapt their transport to fit the needs of the contemporary war. So truly speaking, for Europe, and I think that would give us new chance to rebuild the manufacturing to fit the security related needs. Luba, I know that you need to run to an urgent meeting. I've got 2 questions to you. First of all, as a person who, unlike 2 of our speakers, that is not directed to the manufacturing of weapons, how does it seem to you, which portion of Ukrainian defense can be covered with in-home manufacturing? Because we as macroeconomists, we would definitely want to have as many as possible of these products in Ukraine, because that's workplaces, the money that will go into Ukrainian economy, the coverage of the problems that we had in winter, and now due to the high prices for gas and oil. But at the same time, how do you think, if we were to get maximum from these funds, how well would we handle it? Definitely from the patriotic position, I would also want to make sure that 100% would be locally made in Ukraine, because that is also our security and independence from the supply chains and any other conflicts that appear in the world, and conflicts that break the supply chains, as we see with the conflict on the Middle East. But here we have to select and choose. What do we need? A lot of cheap weapons or very little expensive weapons? And I think that at this point we cannot allow the choice number 2, something that we can do in the peace days, where we can go develop weapons, and we need a lot of cheap weapons. And that's why sometimes now we have to select the Chinese components just because of their costs, even though there are alternatives from the European countries. There's also things from Taiwan, but the situation is difficult with Taiwan because that's a political choice. Ukraine does not recognize Taiwan, and that's why we do not have direct interstate relations with Taiwan. But based on the manufacturing goals, we have this discussion on the Brave One, whether or not to allow the participants of the Brave One, the ones that are on the state financing, to use the Chinese components. And we came to the conclusion that yes, we allow them to use them because right now we need to have off-the-shelf solution, a lot of them, and real quick. So it's a pity, but we still have to use the Chinese components. But with all of that, in the previous week on the work meeting on the tax committee, the discussion was raised towards the change of the discounts. And remember, in the beginning of 2023, there was an introduction of quite broad level of discounts for the finished assemblies and components to manufacture what the armed forces of Ukraine need. But the situation in 3 years have changed. We, as a result, we've got our own manufacturing of certain components and some finished products, and it's time now to review those discounts or advantages, preferences, not completely ban them because that would strike the situation on the front, but perhaps we need to take a different view on the imported products to basically think about us. So we definitely do not need to decrease the import, which is very much required by the front people. And a last question, I'm going to ask it to Ukrainian manufacturers, but your opinion. Max drew a very wonderful picture regarding cooperation with the countries from European Union, but at the same time, we understand that these funds, they should be basically used up in a year and a half. Do you see that European manufacturers, that we as Ukrainian manufacturers we can cooperate with, that we have already gained enough momentum to go and to cooperate and basically get everything that will go to the front? Or is that not applicable now? This is a double-ended basically thing. From one side, Ukrainian manufacturers are not ready to fit European requirements and standards of manufacturing. We can watch it on the several joint ventures that created when Ukraine products just does not comply the European requirements. And not too many companies in Ukraine of a good scale that will be quite easily adaptable to get themselves into compliance with the European standards. On the other side, would Europe be flexible enough to basically release their standard due to the fact that there's innovations, that there's a high pacing speed of the war? So we, for one, and we have to basically challenge Ukrainian manufacturers so they have rather serious attitude to standards, but also we can talk about the European partners that during the active phase of the war, perhaps these standards, they need to be rather more adaptful to expedite the manufacturing of the finished product. Luba, thank you very much. Wish you have a successful meeting. And now we go to the only official person in our discussion, Dorota Suliga. She is the head of the Department of European Foundation of Peace. She's the Deputy Director for Partnership and Crisis for the European External, they are like the analog of Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Foreign Affairs within the EU, those who are not very well tracking the structure of European institutions. So the European Service of External Affairs, they coordinate that department, they coordinate the defense component of this current package of assistance, Ukraine support loan. So Dorota, please. The floor is yours. Please comment on the latest developments. whether we explained everything right in our presentation. Maybe something changed since General Commission documents were passed and published. And what key challenges do you see now, the most obvious challenges on how to use the money in the most efficient way during the next 18 months?
Hi, I hope that you can hear me because I couldn't test the
Perfectly.
voice. Okay, perfect. So thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks, happy to be here. My department has been dealing with military support to Ukraine for quite a long time under a European peace facility, then with for profits. So the profits from immobilized Russian assets, 3.5 billion that we provided mostly for the production in Ukraine. And now we are supporting the Commission because Commission is in the lead for the loan, as this is industrial cooperation program. And this is very important in order to have QMB voting, in order not to have unanimity that was blocking us sometimes in the past. Loan is designed as industrial cooperation program. And this is why this is only about procurement. This is why there are certain things in this regulation that Maxim presented very well. And he cut my presentation at least by 60%. Thanks, Maxim. There were no mistakes there. But this is the basic assumption is that this is military support to Ukraine, but to some extent disguised as the industrial cooperation. This is why we have three objectives here. First and foremost, to respond to Ukraine needs and to deliver what you need to fight tonight. So 26, 27, not long-term deliveries. This is for short-term procurement. 26 should be in ideal world, but and I will come back to the ideal world that unfortunately does not exist. They should be delivered still in 26 or beginning of 27, quarter one, quarter two, and the funds for 27 delivery for the 28, quarter one, 27, and the quarter one, 28. So this is the basic assumption that we are replying to the Ukraine needs. Then the other is that we help to build industrial base in Ukraine, and that we help also to integrate Ukraine defense industry within the European industrial defense base, because this is the basic assumption of the regulation. We believe that, investment in defense industry is in our both interest. This is investment in future, and the 60 billion should be used in the way that also provides long-term benefits to Ukraine, also as a future member of the EU and the EU itself. 60 billion is really a lot. And we are so used to talking about 60 billion that I sometimes think that we are forgetting how much it is if you translate this to procurement, deliveries, all the steps that you have to do to buy all the stuff for 60 billion. Since beginning of the war, EU and EU member states together bilaterally, all the assistance provided, and it's going all the time through Rzeszów to Ukraine, it's altogether 75.2 billion in 4 years. And now we are talking about 1 year and a half and 60 billion, not from stocks mostly, but something that has to be produced, procured, and delivered. So the challenge is immense. So when the colleagues from Ministry of Defense are telling you that they are busy, they are really busy. There is a great team there. I'm always impressed by them working on this loan. And I don't think that they sleep or they don't sleep much, because the challenge is really, really quite big. The main objective is really in order to supply in line with Ukraine needs. So Ukraine is in the driving seat. They have to prepare product schedules, which unfortunately are quite complex because we are the EU, so we are complex. The product schedules have to provide information not only whether it's European produced, but if you need derogations, and in almost all categories you would need derogations, what are the components? Chinese components were mentioned. If there is more than 35% of the value of the final product, it's also derogation, and we need to agreement in QMB of member states for such payment. So far, Ukraine prepared one product schedule based on drones. So for Ukraine, production of drones. So the first money that will be disbursed from this loan will be exclusively used for procurement in Ukraine. But you cannot produce in 1 year and a half for 60 billion what your army is needing. Unfortunately, even we together cannot produce for 60 billion in 2 years what is needed, because there are many, many less important needs. So there is also this opportunity to buy from the outside markets, outside EU, outside Ukraine, if there is no a product available at the time scale, also at the time and scale, because many products can be produced by EU, but with deliveries for 29, 2030, 2031, you don't need this. So there are those derogations. But it's an immense effort, because it's not that Ukraine can do procurement first and then ask us for reimbursement. You have to first identify, Ukraine has to first identify what you want to buy. And this is very well connected. It's not something coming from nowhere. The needs identified by Ministry of Defense and communicated to us: ammunition, air defense, long-range ammunition, air defense. This is something that we have seen in NATO context, discussed for a long time. There is the prioritization that was done by Ukraine for a long time. This is not a surprise for us, what will be needed. But as I said, 60 billion in 1 year and a half is something that will be challenging also for our industries. And this is important, that after 4 years of war, your industry increased a lot, especially on drones. But we are facing production capacity issues, supply chain. There was a discussion on supply chain. Ukraine production is very much reliant on the supply chain from abroad. It's not only about drones, cameras that we could replace, but also even charges for the missiles. There's lots of things that have to be outside, and we hope that this loan will also help to increase in Europe and in Ukraine a possibility for more production of all the components, and that we will not only cooperate on joint ventures on the level of final products, those very famous joint ventures, which are drone production in EU and so on, but also very importantly, which is less shiny and maybe photographic, that we will increase our cooperation on the components level. That EU can provide you components and you can provide us components. So the three objectives of supporting Ukraine is the fight, but also having some return for the both industrial bases and the integration of the industrial bases is equally important, because we see this as a long-term support. It will be challenging also on the side of monitoring how the money is spent, how procurement is ongoing, how Ukraine manages the financial resources. Because contrary to what we were doing on windfall profits, which was only 3.5 billion, which is still a lot of money, but in comparison, only 3.5 billion, we were doing on the EU side procurement, paying, and Ukraine was saying what you need. We were doing the procurement and we delivered. Now it's everything on Ukraine's side. The financial resources will be, as mentioned by Maxim, transferred to a special account where we will have monitoring rights. But we have also the responsibility to the European taxpayers. It's loan, but we are paying interest rates and so on. And this will be also extremely challenging experience to deal with the 60 billion of various procurements in Europe, in Ukraine, and even outside those markets. So this is something that we are, and mostly DG Defis is very much working on, to make sure that we have so-called control strategy and we prevent corruption, which of course is always a threat everywhere with numbers like this. I will not go through other points that I have, because I mostly had the presentation of the regulation that Maxim did very well. I want to also challenge that we are secretive. I think the regulation itself, eligibility rules, and how we plan to implement this together with the Commission are very clear, and we are quite open about this, and the discussions was very public. But if you had any questions, further questions, let me know. Just maybe last point. Loan is not yet active because there are final negotiations between Ukraine and us on Ukraine support loan agreement, which then has to be ratified by Rada, and only then Ukraine can request payments, and then we can transfer money and so on. So it's not yet active, and I still hope that we will be able to do first payments end of June, beginning of July. But there are a number of legal steps before. But it already provides results for Ukraine because the regulation allowed for for payments which are backdated to the moment that the regulation was presented in December. So basically, Ukrainian government is already doing procurement, especially on drones, the first product schedule that they submitted, that will be then repaid by the loan. So it does not mean that military window will start delivering only after the loan is signed, but it delivers already now.
Thank you very much for your honest and very detailed presentation. Well, without presentation because Maxim did really a great job. I have two questions, one technical and one more political. Let's start from the technical one. There are a lot of people on this webinar who are economists, and for them, very technical details sometimes are important. Is this assumption that Mark said correct, that money will not physically go to Ukrainian account because it is important, like for all things like balance of payments, trade balance, etc.
This is still being discussed, but normally there should be two accounts, one in German Bundesbank and the other one in hryvnia in Ukraine. But this is still how the accounts will be functioning are still being discussed. This is one of the things that is outstanding on Ukraine support loan agreement.
Okay. Good. Thank you. We will wait till the final decision. And the second question is more strategic. You mentioned, and I hear it for the first time, that there are these very strict terms for delivery of procured weapons. Are they set in stone, or there can be derogations? Because we understand that there can be interests in EU member states to sell something that can be very expensive, delivered somewhen because like it is highly sophisticated, like planes, for example, etc. And there can be political pressure because like every prime minister wants to say to his or her voters that I managed to sold so many goods produced in my country and paid by European Commission. So are these delivery windows set in stone, or there can be some political changes? Maybe.
No, they can be delivered later. The deadlines, the timeline for the delivery, this is based on Ukraine position. So Ukraine government has very clear position that most of the things they want to see in 26 and 27, Q1 27 for this year and then later. But, and I think there will be cases because there is also some part of the long-term investment that Ukraine wants to do in the defense. You mentioned aircraft. This could be one of those issues that they will decide to have delivery later. We are here following Kiev choices because only Kiev knows what you need for the defense. It's not for us to decide what you need. I think that there will be also, because as I mentioned, 60 billion now pumped in defense industry that is already quite oversubscribed because of not only conflict, not only Russia's war against Ukraine, but other conflicts around the world that we see. It will be very difficult to find contracts and the capacity to deliver within those timelines sometimes. We have also possibilities in the regulation allowing for prioritization of orders for Ukraine to move the other orders further in the queue, but it will not be that easy also. Most of the world companies, defense companies, people who are working on this industry know well, they have quite full books a couple of years ahead. And we need to create a space for Ukraine orders for them to deliver, of course, other than drones in Ukraine. So this will be a challenge. And partially also there are needs of Ukraine that are more strategic, more longer term, building defense capabilities in the country, which are not only for the fight tonight, because there's also tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, and finally, there is one question in Q&A to you. In fact, there are two questions, but one was, in fact, addressed by Maxim in his presentation. But the second one is really important. There was a discussion. There were public statements by Ukrainian Minister of Energy, Denis Shmyhal, that some part of this 60 billion can be allocated to infrastructure protection of the energy sector. What is the current decision making? Like, what are decisions on this? Can it be only air defense, or there can be like some physical defense of critical infrastructure in Ukraine covered by this money?
The language is rather clear of the military window that it should be used for the military needs. So unless Kiev asks differently, but these are for MOD needs. Air defense, yes. Infrastructure, I think it very much depends what type of infrastructure we are talking about and in which context. I don't want to say more on this.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you for answering a lot of important questions and answering them from official position of European External Action Service. It was really very important. Thank you.
I am switching to Ukrainian language, and we've got two more representatives of Ukraine defense sector. Roman, since you are almost our person, you're a member of the supervisory board, I would ask you to be number two in speaking and also to summarize everything that relates to your position, that relates to the questions that we discussed today. Let me just ask with Roxolana Svenchuk. Roxolana is the director of the international cooperation of the Ukrainian Council of Weapon Makers. We've been talking quite well today through rather more official information, but it was still very useful and was logically clear. It had a lot of common sense for us and for European Commission. So what is the position of the manufacturers of the weapons? Are they very happy with what the resources were used today, with what's on the table now, or do we need to have more changes to get the best results for the purposes of both defense of the country and the development of internal production and the best economic impact in Ukraine during the days of war? Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for question as well. We have just had a comparison of the loan with the portion of the GDP and with the military aid provided as well. From my end, I can also compare, let's say, if you give a quote of the last potential of Ukrainian industry for military, that the assessment was about 55 billion euros for the year 2026. Then, of course, now we've got a loan for 30 billion euros. This is quite substantial amount for the market. This tool, it makes sense to discuss it from two ends. First of all, what relates to the very framework from the side of the EU and from the rules that are, they're in the regulation there. On the other side, how would these funds be distributed and how would they be administrated from the side of Ukraine and Ukraine institutions? If you start talking about the regulation itself, and one of the goals is update and modernization of the defense base. It looks like we spent lots of attention. Definitely a lot of that. Everything is good, that everything that Ukraine manufacturers did not have a capacity basically to process such amounts. There are so many links on the SAFE tool where so many countries, apologies, I was just recently not feeling well, so to support their own manufacturers. And such a tension exists all the time. It begins the question of procurements from the Ukrainian manufacturers, from Ukrainian in-house market, or from European manufacturers or third countries. In particular, there was a statement there about the development of the timelines for the products for the EU and for the expert group, in which and Ukrainians are not a part of that yet, especially if it's not going to be an advisory thing, but a mandatory step, then definitely for the market, it's a mixed signal, because I'm afraid that these procedures will be quite lengthy. And besides that, it's going to be more ripped out from the needs of the front and the end users, because in Ukraine, quite quickly things are, born, then there's a proof of concept, and then with certain lag, it goes to the Western doctrines and procurements and so on and so forth, just like the ground robotized complexes, which were not very much in use a year ago. But at the same time, it's clear why is mechanism there. And from the standpoint of corruption-related risk and coherence in the management of all of these programs. But at the same time, from the industry side, even there's going to be more questions on the practice. How would the tool be used from Ukraine side, like from the very same time, even the product supply timelines. The market question is, what would be the rules? Who is going to be, we're going to be talking about the exact products and manufacturing, and what Madame Dorota mentioned. Most likely, there's going to be a designated product, and so the question would be from the manufacturers about how to get into the list. What are the criteria? What are the processes? Generally speaking, manufacturers, other than the question of resource and funds, the biggest question is information and of the transparent, clear procedures. Definitely, it's not a showstopper, but that's one of the key questions. Another standardized question is how such new tools correlate with the existing ones. Like, for instance, one of the main mechanisms nowadays is rebuilt with Ukraine, that these companies, would it be possible to support the joint ventures via the credit? And other questions, would these funds be to the procurement of the finished product, or also and also to the support and scaling up of the manufacturing? And this is very good subject thing. And also at the very same time, with the assistance of relocation and counter-strike, think that there were so many funds that basically you need very fast. To summarize everything, it's definitely such a great thing that such tool exists. We are very grateful to our partners for all of the support, especially to those who've been supporting. And I would like to agree with Mr. Maxim that we as the state, we need to have very strategic approach to such stories. And we need to use these funds not like a shopping list, but rather like an investment into the development of long-term capacity of manufacturing, scaling up the manufacturing, and upgrades for better supply chain, and overall into the integration of Ukraine into the supply chains, not via the transition of IP and data, but as the equal partnership, without which it's impossible to make adequate munitions that would comply with the contemporary reality of the war. And in such a way, we as a state, we would also be able to do our contribution into the security of Europe, and also into the autonomy in manufacturing and providing of the defense for our continent. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Roxolana. One question to you before we go to Roman. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a good, quite loud statement from the advisor of the President Alexander Kanishin. And for that moment, we definitely understand that the numbers are very, very outdated, but nevertheless, the ratios are important. That the volume of the procurements of Ukrainian defense used to be 6 billion euros. The capacity to produce was $20 billion. After that, he did not do any applications, so we do not have anything fresh and anything so vivid publicly from him. But what we see now, and what Sasha Mironenko constantly reports in our reviews, that there is continuous growth of expenditures on procurements in the defense. And how merged are these numbers? And in this particular case, if we are able to reroute these finance resources in Ukraine defense sector, how well do we have resource for growing, so that we can basically produce in the amounts that Ministry of Defense is asking for, just like Dorota mentioned? Or do we need to understand that no, we have reached certain max production in the human resource or any other resource or technology, basically ceilings or problems that appear for us to keep moving deeper and higher, something that we do not know of? That window still exists. As the research says, from the public sector in the recent year or two, there were no such public research, but at the same time, we expect that it's about 30%, but these are not official data, that, things that are not used now. Sometimes it reaches to 50%, depending on the assessment methodology and so on and so forth. And the important thing here is to consider whether we talk about the manufacturing of what we have in the territory of the country of Ukraine, or we take to consideration also the joint ventures that can be opened, or also the relocation of Ukrainian manufacturing abroad. Just because, in Ukraine, there are questions that exist as far as facilities go and the security goes. We also have a question in the staffing, but and also the cost of the engagement of such staffing also increases, because you need to now hire people that you oftentimes you have to teach them from the very zero to hero, due to the growth of the manufacturing. And so the potential is there, and perhaps it would be possible for you to use certain credits of the turnover funding and some funds for training that would also help us to increase the volumes of production, and not just as we talk about the procurement of the finished product. Thank you very much, Roxolana, for your feedbacks and for participation. Roman, and I see that you're here. I'm not going to be asking you a very in-depth question, because as I know you so well as the member of our supervisory board, I am tracking well your broad vision, and I'm very much interested into your view of the finance person and inventor and the opportunity that are growing. Because on one hand, this is opportunity. On the other hand, from what we heard from Dorota, truly speaking, in her words, there was definitely a certain anxiety in her words regarding the fact how possible would it be to efficiently use that amount for the needs of Ukrainian defense sector in such a limited time frame. So what is your observation, and what are the opportunities for this? So we have Roman Slujik. Other than the fact that he is the member of our supervisory board, he is also the head of the investment committee of Resist UA. This is investment fund that invests into Ukrainian defense manufacturing. Roman, floor is yours. I'm going to be speaking English as well. For Dorota, it's going to be the best.
No, я теж буду англійською мовою для Дороти. Це буде краще. Yeah, I'll do this in English, Dorota, because I think it's important. The message. I just want to say, first of all, not just thank you for this 60 billion, but thank the European Commission and European people for all the taxpayer dollars, euros that you sent us over the years. As I always say, like without that support, we probably, a lot of us wouldn't be alive right now, right? So this is absolutely huge. But just to put this in perspective, the 60 billion, do you know what is European procurement? Like before the war, like how much Europe was procuring in weapons a year?
Have
Do
no
you have a
idea.
number? You have no idea. It's 100 billion a year, right? So the whole of Europe was procuring 100 billion a year. And we are right now in Ukraine. The number is classified, but I estimate that the amount of procurement that goes through and gets to these Ukrainian manufacturers is, 10, 15, 20 billion, right? It's at least 10 right now. I mean, maybe it's as high as 20. This is what the Ukrainian manufacturers are already absorbing. So yes, it is a huge figure, and I don't think Ukraine alone will be able to absorb it. That's why, yes, there's going to be bulk purchases of, Patriot missiles. There's going to be contracts for airplanes that will not be delivered, from Rafale or from Saab, that will not be delivered in the next few years. But I just want to say, like, why is Ukrainian ecosystem so amazing, and like what is what are the kind of secret ingredients of success? And I just want to say, like, the fact that Brave One, which kind of evolved from this army of drones, that it's seeding a tremendous amount of projects with very little money. Like they only spent maybe 150 million last year in grants they gave out. Like this year, maybe it will be more, but it's a very, very tiny amount. And they're just giving grants, like $200,000 grants, 1 million euro, like 2 million euro grants to projects that they think they're going to be essential. Once these grants go in and the companies develop the products, then guys like me, the actual VCs, private money is coming in and starting funding these guys. I estimate that at least $500 million of private money already went into the ecosystem, maybe even more. And then, there's two paths, right? Like, so there's a path where people get to government procurement, like proper government procurement, where they get like hundreds of millions, like billion-dollar contracts, and they're already like big players. They're considering themselves like your local Ukrainian primes. You all know these big names. But for the smaller names that are actually driving the innovation, there's also this tremendous mechanism, this dot chain, which we didn't talk about, which basically military units get points for killing Russians and destroying Russian equipment. And then they can spend these points on buying anything they want. Like, it's not something that MOD orders. They basically just say, I want to order this land drone, or I want to order this spy plane, or I want to order, and there are already hundreds and hundreds of manufacturers in that system. And it's very easy for any startup to register and become a client of this, become a producer in this dot chain. And if a military unit orders, they just accumulate all the orders within a month and then just write a check to the company and say, here's $500,000, here's $1 million, this is what the military units ordered, you have to deliver. Last year, about $500 million went through this dot chain procurement. This year, I estimate is going to be about $1.5 billion, right? So my message to the European Commission, like, if you want to really, like, in a clean way and without this corruption, whatever, like, risks, rather than giving like a couple $1 billion to Firepoint and telling them, oh, create some like new ballistic missile, giving like a few extra 100 million to Brave One and to this dot chain ecosystem is going to create much larger impact. Second thing, in terms of capacity to expand into Europe, we were at a meeting with Zelensky like a couple months ago. He invited all the big funds, kind of to talk to him. And he said this thought like, oh, I want all the IP to stay in Ukraine because we are paying for it in our blood. So I don't like the situation where something is developed in Ukraine and suddenly it emerges as a British company or Estonian company or American company and it has an IP and nothing is left over in Ukraine. So I want to have a situation where Ukrainian companies have the IP and they license it to Europe, to our partners, whatever. So from government point of view, I understand him. I would be like, this is also my desire, and I invest in Ukrainian companies. I want to develop Ukrainian companies. I want them to be a normal part of it. But unfortunately, there is no clean mechanism for a Ukrainian company to license this IP to a JV that they've created, with Saab or with Tails, like with any European company. I'm not even talking about non-European. it's a very manual process. Yes, Radas Broyarif and Commission can help you like by hand, walk you through that process, but it's all very kind of individual based. And this is my kind of push, if I haven't asked for the European Commission, push Ukraine as part of what you're giving this loan to say, normalize this process. That if a respectable European company like Saab, we just had a conversation with Saab the other week because they want to partner with one of the companies in our portfolio and they don't know how. And the company doesn't know how. And we were asking Frontline, another company that we know that did this JV with Quantum Systems, how did you do it? And the story that they were telling us just makes your hair stand up, like how difficult the process was, right? So what I'm basically saying, this should be a really, really huge ask from the European Commission to Ukrainians, normalize and regulate the way that Ukrainian IP goes into the European ecosystem, because majority of the people just bite the bullet, take the risk, and just say, we just register a company in Estonia and just create all the IP in Estonia and we forget about Ukraine, or in Delaware, just like case with Swarmer. Swarmer is kind of Ukrainian Miltech IPO, company registered in Delaware, all the IP in Delaware, zero presence in Ukraine, great Ukrainian company, right? So what I'm saying, like these are the types of situations we really want to normalize and avoid. And what my message was, to the president and others, that yes, we are paying for this IP with our blood, but the Europeans and Americans, our allies, are paying for this with their taxpayer dollars, right? So it's okay that we share that. We cannot just sit here and say, oh, this is only Ukrainian IP. No, it's all of us together with our allies own it. And for us, how to normalize this relationship and establish these deeper links between us and the European Union companies, that is going to be the key towards this absorption. Because right now, yes, it's absolutely a seller's market. Like any company that we have in our portfolio, everybody approaches them and says, we want to build a factory in Romania, in Germany, in Arab Emirates. We want to produce what you have, whatever. Everybody's running after them. And obviously for us, the first destination should be Europe. But how to normalize these processes and how to do this, this is going to be a really big thing. So what I'm basically saying is, yes, it is going to be a challenge for both Ukrainian and Europeans, to absorb this much money. But I think it's possible. And I'm just saying that rather than trying to go top down and drop all the money into primes, be that European or Ukrainian primes, actually designating more of the money to programs like Brave One, like Chain, like these guys that help smaller teams, get to this money. I mean, obviously, I'm talking in my book because I'm investing mostly in the smaller teams, but I'm just seeing the results that those guys are doing. Like I was just sitting at a meeting yesterday where there's a company in my portfolio that is developing an anti-Shahid, anti-air missile. And Brave One basically came to us and said, look, there's another team that is doing a similar missile. And they gave grants to both of them, right? So they gave €2 million grant to one team and they gave €4 million grant to the other team. And they're both tasked them both, like just basically create an anti-Shahid missile that will cost like $10,000, $20,000. And hopefully we will have first Shahids destroyed by these missiles in the summer. And Brave One just set those two teams together and just said, guys, how about you basically cooperate so that you both reach the goal faster? Like, because yes, you're both running in the same direction, you're both building a missile, but we believe that if you combine forces, you will both get to the same target faster, and Ukraine will be safer because of that. And these two guys sat down and they were talking about how they potentially can do cooperation, how they could potentially even do some merger between them, whatever, right? So this is exactly what this ecosystem is, sort of what the Brave One created, is what is unique. And I cannot say names because I signed an NDA, but the missile kit that is in my portfolio, a huge American prime was here in Kiev, and they asked to see him. And they went to his garage in Bucha, where Russian tanks used to stand, where he's actually brewing the solid rocket fuel and doing this missile. And they came away shocked about how far he has gone in just a couple of years. And we may get to a situation where, I love Luba's thoughts that we should have our own anti-ballistic missiles, but honestly, I think that's really far away. But if we will have first shoot downs of jet normal Shaheeds by Ukrainian missiles that were not built in the 70s in the Soviet Union, but actually designed from scratch with new components during the war, that will be amazing. And that is exactly the result of this ecosystem that we're building. So anyway, so I'll just, so these are my kind of random thoughts, but I just want to say, like, thank you to the European Commission that you're doing this, and continue, think about like supporting programs that work, especially like Brave One and this, dot-chain marketplace.
Романе, дякую. Dorota, Roxolana, if you want to have comments on it, you have a few minutes for this.
Maybe just a few words. Thanks for those words, and I think you touched a very important point on making regulatory environment that would support those joint ventures. We really want to see more joint ventures. We want to see more built for Ukraine in EU and built with Ukraine. And we also followed very closely the story of Quantum. Now we call it a success, but it was a very complicated birth. And we need to find better ways also, not only in Ukraine, this is prerequisite. On your side, some things have to be simplified, but also on the EU side. And we need to work on this, because we can lose the window of opportunity for both of us, for EU and Ukraine. Dot-chain we know very well. I met with Artyom, the head of Dot-chain, twice.
Jumaliyev.
It's very important for us. And we also, when Ukraine chooses some procurement, we want also the numbers, and Dot-chain provides also analytical numbers, what troops really prefer. This is objective information, what troops are using, and Dot-chain is amazing for this type of also analytical information that helps us to see if the procurement being done makes sense, and it's based on objective data of troops selecting certain and not other products. And I'm, on personal level, quite amazed by both Brave One and Dot-chain. We don't have such tools in most of our countries. We don't also need this very speedy procurement, but it's amazing what was done in both those cases. Shapova.
Thank you.
Have you met Gritsenyuk, the head of Brave One? Andrei Gritsenyuk.
No, I
Bold
met
guy.
some Brave One. I don't remember the names.
Dorota, you should, this is one thing, maybe ask Gleb, and I'll give you Gleb the contact and he can pass them to you. Andrei Gritsenyuk is an amazing executive. He is, I kind of happened to know him before this because I was supervisory board member of Privatbank, and he was CTO of Privatbank. And then he did this DIA, he was head of DIA, and then now they put him as, the government put him as the top of this Brave One. Amazing executive, absolutely clean. And he looks at all the projects that are coming up. He was just telling me the other day that he saw just last month 40 projects that are coming up with ideas that could potentially be game changers, and they're giving grants to these type of projects. So he has tremendous visibility into the stuff that a year before it hits Dot-chain. Right. So what I'm saying is, for you, in terms of thinking how to deploy some of this capital, in terms of effectiveness of deployment, I think in terms of being able to attract the private capital. So I, as a private capital, become the kicker. Brave One and Dot-chain are the key game changers. Because if it was just 5 big manufacturers doing all the drones or whatever, we would be in the same situation as Europe or Russia is, whatever. We would not have these type of breakthroughs where young, small teams can really do things that change the situation. But anyway, Dorota, thank you so much for your...
Romane, you can send the contact to me and I will forward it to Dorota.
I'm also so glad that we've got into once again very detailed practical explanation, which means that everything moves. I very much say thank you to everybody who participated in the discussion. I think it was very useful as well to those who listened to us today. We'll meet again in a month we are going to be discussing some new subject that Ukrainian economy always appears in during the war. We would like to say thank you to not to the member of the EU, but to the Great Britain as a country that's very helpful to us for the support of the project. Thank you and wish